one of the things about today's budget was the line item for India's defense budget, which is nearly 5.93 lakh crore, the single biggest item of expenditure in the budget, more than 13% of central government's whole expenditure. But it did not find a mention in the finance minister's budget speech today in Parliament. That was a bit surprising. Overall, it's a very routine defense budget. It barely makes up for the high inflation and the decline in rupee exchange rate that we have witnessed over the last year. The increase is barely making up for that. The fact that this happens while a border crisis with China is on, and while India is talking about the Indo-Pacific strategy, and while the Indian armed forces are suffering because of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, is surprising and also worrisome at one level. What stood out in this budget was that there was an allocation for the Agnipath scheme, which was announced last year, which is a short-term recruitment scheme for soldiers. More than 3,000 crore rupees have been allocated separately for that scheme. Also, what we saw during the this financial year, that the revenue expenditure has gone up dramatically, particularly for the Indian Air Force, which clearly shows that because of the Russia-Ukraine crisis, the amount of spares, the amount of ammunition, the amount of stores that the Indian Air Force is getting has clearly suffered, and they have gone for other sources of procurement, other sources of revenue. It's a very significant increase and shows that clearly Air Forces pulled up its socks to get more. The capital expenditure has been underspent, although by a very little amount, but it was allocated 1.53 lakh crores, and only 1.5 lakh crores have been spent. The increase which we see in the capital expenditure of around 12,000 rupees crores for the next year, for the next financial year, is actually not much, although it may seem so, because again, it only makes up for the inflation and the decline in rupee rate, because most of India's defense equipment and platforms are imported, and the payment has to be made in dollars. A decline in the rate of rupee always affects the amount of equipment that you can buy. What clearly stands out is that with this capital expenditure, India cannot go for any major procurement project, whether it be a third aircraft carrier, whether it be more fighter squadrons for the Indian Air Force, or an augmentation of air defense capabilities of the Indian Army. Any major procurement project looks highly unlikely, and therefore the state of modernization will continue to remain where it is. As always, the defense pensions took a bulk of the budget, including the areas for the one rank, one pension scheme. 1.53 lakh crores actually went into pensions this year, which is more than the amount that was spent on capital expenditure. So India was actually, the armed forces were spending more on their pensions than they were spending on modernization or buying equipment for their organization. Next year also the pensions will be at 1.38 lakh crores. And plus salaries, which are again another 1.5 lakh crores approximately. So we are talking about a bulk of India's defense expenses actually going only in pensions and salaries. That is taking away a lot of India's expenditure on its national security. If we were looking for a direction from the budget, it is clearly lacking, it is clearly missing. It does not show us any direction, whether in terms of modernization, whether in terms of preparing for an Indo-Pacific strategy, or dealing with China on the border, or even with modernization. It is business as usual budget, which is a tad surprising in these times.